Welcome back to our conference on Epic Fury and Rising Lion. We're here for the second panel to discuss the state of play, the current state of the war. My name is Nadav Samin, and I'm a fellow with the Hudson Institute's Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East. Now, I can't match our director's charm, but I'm at least competitive in the good looks department. So we're going to keep things moving here. We have a jam-packed, a power-packed panel here. Rebeccah Heinrichs, a senior fellow here at the Hudson Institute and director of the Keystone Defense Initiative. She's a prolific commentator on the war and defense matters. We have Takeyh, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is a prolific author on Iran. He's written many books on Iran and the Middle East. Glad to have him here visiting. And lastly, you've been introduced to Can Kasapoğlu, who is going to talk to us about the military balance. I'd like to dive right in. So, with regards to the state of the war, the news changes every day, right? Today, Lebanon PNG'd the Iranian ambassador, for example, and there was reports that or additional attacks against gas facilities in Iran, whether true or not. However, the broad trends are remaining the same. I'd like to check in with Rebeccah for the pulse of the White House right now. Where is the president? On the one hand, the United States and Israel enjoy freedom of operations over Iranian skies. Iran is the size of Western Europe. This is not an inconsequential matter. On the other hand, Iran is continuing to launch UAVs and missiles at Israel, at the Gulf states, and continuing to hold the Strait of Hormuz in a stranglehold. So if you were to take the temperature of the president right now, how would you read his view of the status of the war?
Great. Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a privilege to be here with all of you. So thank you for coming here to listen to us discuss this here at Hudson Institute. First of all, it's almost it's hard to know exactly what's going on in the mind of President Trump, but I can tell you maybe what I would be thinking about if I were him. And that's that the military piece of this, as you say, is going very, very well. So even yesterday, when President, I believe this was yesterday. Time is kind of a flat circle right now, but when the president essentially announced that we were not going to be striking energy-related targets or reactors, which was a threat that he had made if the Iranians did not immediately stop threatening the Strait. And that was kind of the focus, and some experts sort of interpreted that as that we basically were moving towards a ceasefire of some sort in all strikes. But of course, the B-52s were dropping 2,000-pound, JDAMs on Iran while this was ongoing, and President Trump was looking for some kind of diplomatic progress being made. And then at the same time, there seems to be it seems to me clear that there's another line of effort coming out of the White House, really led by Secretary Bessent, to make some short-term changes to stabilize oil prices in the immediate. So the two things I think the president kind of might feel some kind of timeline pressure is just getting the Strait open, and so there's domestic pressure then, of course, because of upcoming elections. But if you just look at the battlefield and how well it's going on the U.S. and Israeli side, and we can talk about what I think what the Israelis are doing in parallel with what the United States is doing, that is going very, very well. And so even if the president had more time that's not related to sort of political realities, I think that he would be feeling less pressure. But for now, it seems like he's got at least some time to play with, but that's kind of where the pressure is.
Thanks. And let me follow up because you mentioned the Israelis. As I understand it from the Israeli press, Israel had a goal of reducing Iran's ballistic missile launchers to around 5% of their pre-war capacity. Those were around 470 at the beginning of the war, and they're in the low 100s now. So you're assessing that they're on a good pace with their progress. And secondly, do you feel that the Pentagon is also based on all indicators, they are feeling good about their progress. But what is your sense of the Pentagon and the IDF?
So Admiral Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM, gave a great briefing yesterday where he laid out what the United States was still going after, what was still on the target list, and they're still making their way through that. The Israelis seem to be more concentrated on regime leadership. So it's IRGC, it's Basij, and they're making their way through that. So diminishing the most competent of the dangerous leaders in Iran, they're eliminating. while the United States is working on missile launchers, ballistic missiles, drones. And the piece, though, that I did not hear from Admiral Cooper, which tells me that there's still work to be done, is on the nuclear piece. And we can just discuss that. But in terms of going after the capacity for the Iranians to threaten their neighbors, threaten U.S. forces in the region, they're being very successful in going through that target list, which then, if we were to move into another phase where you might need to have some kind of special operations team go in there to either remove, physically remove, or some other kind of effort to further entomb so that they can't be used again, the enriched uranium. If we were to kind of move more towards that, you would need to finish this first military phase, which Admiral Cooper seems to be pretty pleased with.
Yeah, thanks. I do want to come back to the nuclear, but turning to Ray, who is running Iran right now? Is there a cohesive leadership cadre that is organizing this defense, or have they moved into some other sort of approach to endure?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and I'm glad to see Mike Durant is not here. So that's always good news. Who's running the country? It's actually sort of a mystery, but they are making decisions. They do seem to be operating in some sort of a mechanism. So in some way, I mean, notionally, there's a three-man cadre set up, and advising the supreme leader and so forth. The country seems to be making decisions every day. So however haphazard the situation may be, however stressed the regime may be, it is still capable of functioning in terms of its decision making. Now, that may be difficult to put a consensus together. Maybe there's a greater degree of time consumption today, but their decision making apparatus, as far as one can tell, is working.
You wrote recently that there is not a limitless pool of talent at the leadership level, and that so Israeli U.S. strategy to remove the most effective leaders, therefore, might have utility if allowed to play out. Is that the implication of your analysis?
But one has to be cautious about that. The Islamic Republic is a sort of an ideological entity, and therefore it does have a certain degree of cadre it can draw from. Whether they'll be better capable or not remains to be seen. I think the loss of Ali Larijani was particularly important, not because of internal security situation. There are other people that can do that. But in terms of that, he was capable of appealing to foreign audiences. He was kind of, many people were thought of him as a pragmatist, which is kind of news to many of us, probably news to Ali Larijani. But but nevertheless, he was capable of now doing that. He had dealt with international audiences a great deal during his time as a Secretary to the Supreme National Security Council, longest serving Speaker of the Parliament. And he was kind of one of the people with rare skills. So he will have a replacement, and it will take time for the regime to find its footing. But some of the people that are being lost would be difficult to replace, particularly not in terms of managing the internal security situation, but in terms of appealing to international audiences.
Thank you. John, turning to the military balance, where do you see the picture right now, particularly with respect to Iran's UAV, continued UAV capacity, its capacity to launch them specifically at the Gulf states, and also its capacity to maintain this stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz?
Actually, we have three different pictures depending on where you are from where you are looking at the issue. At the operational level, the picture depicted by my colleague Rebeccah Heinrichs is reflecting very good news for the United States and its NATO allies, and also like really intimidating news to the Chinese and the Russians about the American level of military superiority, because we are seeing thousands of flight hours, thousands of combat sorties over Iran, and Iran is a huge airspace. So far, we had 3 friendly fire incidents by the Kuwait air defenses, one still mysterious F-35 incident that ended up with an emergency landing, not by a downed combat aircraft. And the air operations are going very well, and the level of information superiority, you need to come up with a target set or tens of thousands of targets being hit by the American military is really something. That's the operational level, that's good news. But war is not only operational level war fighting, it's a political military act. And there are two things we have to keep in mind. One is COG, center of gravity. Center of gravity of Iran was not Ali Khamenei. This is not Gaddafi's Libya. It is the Revolutionary Guards. So far, there are no high-level defections from Revolutionary Guards. And if a high-level Revolutionary Guards general wants to defect, I don't know, and he doesn't know how to do that, because the political warfare dimension of that campaign, I wouldn't want to say missing, I would say is not matching the military, technical, and operational sophistication of the campaign. We do not see any changes in the doctrinal order of battle in the Revolutionary Guards. Launching a ballistic missile into foreign territory, including high-level targets like international airports, like oil infrastructure, is the highest level of and the riskiest order that a missile brigade has to conduct. And we are not seeing even one telltale indicator that the Iranian missile brigades are refusing to follow orders. Whoever giving the orders, be it the Revolutionary Guards, be it my mother-in-law, be it Mujtaba, whoever giving the definitely. So whoever giving the orders, and Mujtaba Khamenei, or his ex-posts, so to speak, his social media posting, gave 3 warning signals to us. Again, we don't know if he is hospitalized in Moscow. We do not know if he is tweeting personally. We do not know if the Revolutionary Guards generals or my mother-in-law tweeting all these posts, but there are 3 warning signs to us. War reparations, he highlighted, in a way that Saddam Hussein approached to Kuwait. So when the music stops, I don't think the Iranians will stop going after Gulf Arab allies of the United States. About the American bases, I think from now on, if the regime is left wounded but not killed, one of its utmost objective would be forcing an American withdrawal from the region. And Strait of Hormuz, Mujtaba's X account openly underlined that the operations in Strait of Hormuz will carry on. I think that also gives us what a wounded Islamic Republic, but not killed Islamic Republic, would look like following the war. It would be the arch enemy of the American military presence in the region. It will be asking for war reparations from the Gulf Arab states, and if they are not ransomed enough in the Iranian eyes to satisfy them, Iran will go after counter-value targets, as we call, and the Strait of Hormuz. So we have differences at operational level and strategic level.
Yeah.
The worst news is for the Gulf Arab states because they are the battlefield of that war, and their magazine depth is not looking very bright right now.
I'd like to come back to the question of the Gulf states, but for all of us in the room, how has Iran been able to take control of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz so effectively, so rapidly? Could you explain the tactical and military coordination that is required to achieve that and to maintain that, and perhaps propose some ways to break that stranglehold?
First of all, they had a very good understanding that this is business. In order to kill the business of a restaurant, you do not have to actually go there and shoot somebody. You just shoot the ceiling. That's enough to kill the entire business of that restaurant for the rest of the month. If they even spread the news that they are mining the Strait of Hormuz, insurance prices for the big heads of international shipping will quadruple, overday, within 24 hours. And there are 72 hours periods of special insurance prices for those companies. We call it the wartime clause. If the war erupts, the insurance company retains the right to change the entire deal. And that's what all these big heads are dealing with right now. And escorted tankers can be a very good military solution, but in the realm of business, it doesn't look so profit attracting, so business friendly. And the insurances and the payments that your crew would demand from you would be very different than peacetime operations. So that's one thing that the Iranians had a very good understanding of. In order to kill business, they just needed to threaten the Strait of Hormuz and turn it into a war zone, even if the United States is winning that war. That's a war zone, and no company would want to transit through a war zone. Second, they had a very good understanding of manipulating oil prices at a short period, would put immense pressure on the American administration in a prolonged warfighting situation. I think that's the second thing that they have managed to succeed. And the third, we are seeing a perfect example of what we call in war studies the indirect approach. The Iranians are not fighting directly the Americans and the Israel. Of course, they are targeting American bases. Of course, they are targeting Israel. But if you look at the outlook, United Arab Emirates, for instance, took half of the punishment from the Iranian missile and drone salvos. The second up is Kuwait, and then Bahrain, which has the smallest air and missile defense forces. Why? Because the Iranian war planning was designed to put indirect pressure on the United States by igniting like wildfires in other corners of the Middle East, which would have global repercussions, so to speak. And also this we discussed in the first panel, Iran owes this success to its drone warfare capabilities, even at very high interception rates, like 10%, even 5% breaches in the overall defenses means like 5% of entire drones are hitting, for instance, the LNG fields in Qatar, which took out 17% of the Qatari LNG capacity. So they see the asymmetry of between their drones and the soft targets, and the importance of those soft targets at global scale, global economic scales.
Thank you.
I just want to underscore a really important point that Sean just said, which is that the strait is closed because it's de facto closed because people don't want to go through it. So when President Trump made the comment, look, the strait's actually open, he basically kind of like, you might get hit by a missile or a drone, but you can go through it. And people kind of mocked him, but there was a lot of truth to what he's saying, which is that, you know, we don't know to the degree to which it is mined. And I hear conflicting military analysts say different things in terms of their level of confidence that there might be mines there. But that's why part of the U.S. military effort right now is to take out all of the ships that have been responsible for laying mines. And then also there is an announcement of Admiral Cooper, somebody from CENTCOM made about going after some of these essentially hardened targets that were kind of along the strait there that were responsible for having a coercive effect on the strait, taking those out as well. So there's a military piece of this, but then there also is just how do you increase the confidence of the individuals and the insurance companies to be able to feel comfortable going through. But there are some ships that are going through. I know the Indians have gone through with some escorts, and because they need to. They don't have the luxury of kind of waiting this out.
Thank you to both of you for your responses. There seem to be sort of two crescendos building, and it's hard to tell how much is political communication and how much is core strategy. On the one hand, you have the president indicating that negotiations are ongoing again. He has always wanted, I think by many people's judgment, a negotiated solution that met the United States' core objectives: elimination of the enrichment capacity of Iran, elimination of its ballistic missile threat, at least to Israel and Europe, and elimination of funding for the proxy. So I imagine that he would be pleased if Iran conceded on that score today. But at the same time, the strait is the near term. The issue in the strait is the near term crisis, right? And I think we are moving Marines into the field. Rebeccah, could you speak to how these two dynamics might be interacting? This negotiation on the one hand, and perhaps a special operation that's building.
Sure. Well, I would just say it's, you know, I don't want to under characterize the problem that the Iranians' threat to the strait is causing. It is a problem, but I'm not quite in the alarmist camp as some people who were like, this is just a giant geopolitical crisis. I don't think that it is. I mean, even here in the United States, I wake up in the morning and check sort of the average gas prices in the U.S. We're still far below the peak of gas prices in June of, I think, 2022 during the Biden administration. So I think that some people sort of maybe over, at least for the United States. There's other countries where it's much more of a problem for them, but for us, it really isn't. And furthermore, over the last decade, anytime I participate in any kind of wargaming scenario or workshop or something, where analysts and military experts are looking at what the Iranians could potentially do if the United States were to take military action against their nuclear force, in every single assessment, everybody understood that the Iranians were going to threaten the Strait.
Right.
This notion that the Trump administration didn't take this into account, I just find that completely unbelievable. Of course they did, but I think that the way they're viewing it is you win on your military objectives, and as John said, it's really military objectives really are a means to get to a political outcome that on terms that are good for your own country and your interests. And I think we're getting there. So I think that you have the military piece, and then you have Scott Bessent has clearly been deployed by this administration to make some sort of short-term changes, for instance, relieving sanctions on Iranian oil to tag them to the normal market price rather than the Chinese getting cheap oil from the Iranians, et cetera. He did that in order to relax global prices to kind of make that change. So, he's trying to keep energy prices lower in the near term while the military piece continues to do its part. And then you have this thing which we have the least amount of insight in, which is this diplomatic effort. Are there individuals inside the regime who can maintain control of the, have the credibility to continue to work with the regime and the military, but also more pragmatic, potentially somebody who's more self-interested rather than Islamic Republic of Iran interested. And I think that that's where you're clearly going to see the U.S. working with the intelligence operators inside Israel who are going to be the best at having those psychological profiles of the individuals in there. And I think it's becoming clearer as we just see who is left alive. I mean, those who are still alive in Iran are those who the Israelis are permitting to breathe. Yeah. And so I think that those are the different lines of effort that are all going on simultaneously.
Well, I think that's a great insight that we should keep in mind, that the political objectives remain as they were, and the price fluctuations of oil, which the Iranians have intended to try to raise the cost of this war, the White House is actively trying to manage that through a range of policies so they can push through to achieve their political objectives. I think that makes good sense. On the myths on the gap between rhetoric and reality, how should we, those of us who might be first paying close attention to Iranian revolutionary rhetoric, how should we interpret what's actually going on, vice what the government is saying at the official level?
That's very hard to decipher at this point. I do think that the regime that comes out of this conflict, whenever it ends, is likely to be more militant in its outlook, but perhaps less competent in its ability to execute. It's not a good combination. They seem to have had a strategy, which, by the way, they announced before the war, that they were going to regionalize the conflict and affect the global maritime progress in order to raise prices and to put pressure on the international community and the global economy. That was a strategy that was announced persistently and over again. And they have demonstrated a certain asymmetrical ability to do that irrespective of the level of pressure they're in. And there are several problems here. Whenever this war ends, all three of the protagonists will be, in their own way, in a position to declare victory. The Americans and the Israelis can point to quantitative assessment sanctioning their victory. And the Iranians have said they survived, they took on great powers, and they managed to inflict enough pressure that caused perhaps some sort of a setback on their adversaries. And their aim at this particular point, as far as I can tell, and all this has to be very tentative, is not necessarily to get out of this war to prevent the next one. And have it in mind of everybody, particularly in the United States, that should you want to do this again, should you want to mow the lawns again, you will encounter costs that you may be unprepared to bear, given your politics, your alliances, and so forth. Because after the June war, the narrative that evolved is that Iran was too reticent, and it didn't affect the Gulf states and others in terms of putting pressure on the United States. I would say, coming back to the United States, there is a narrative emerging, if not congealing, that the United States is actually losing this war. You certainly see it in the national media. You're certainly seeing it among the Democratic Party, and even some voices within the Republican Party are very skeptical of it. Greg and I actually compared it to the 1968 Tet Offensive, where Lyndon Johnson won the war on the field and lost it at home. And that's a very serious problem. And why are we in this position? Partly because the Iranian asymmetrical strategy and increased global prices has had some effect. Partly is because the administration has lacked a strategic communication ability to explain itself. The president has not addressed the country. He has offered explanations that are evolving. Some of them are quite practical, such as degrading Iranian military capabilities. Some of them are fantastical, that he should pick the next supreme leader. Sometimes he calls for the ceasefire. Then he calls for a 48 attack on the Iranian. Then he pauses that. There's an ample confusion about what the American objectives are and how achievable they are. So, and at this point, as far as I know, others can comment on this, there has been no congressional hearings on this. So the American people don't have a sustained explanation from the executive branch about what it is that the United States is trying to achieve. And there is a counter narrative. It's in the New York Times every day that the United States is actually got into a war that it misjudged, it misapprehended, and misplanned, and is trying to look for an exit ramp. I don't know if the administration is looking for the exit plan. I tend to think that the Scott Bessent moves are less about the global economy, because I don't think they affect the prices, particularly desanctioning the Iranian oil. That might be a signal to the Iranians that the Americans are willing to find a way to back down. I don't know the answer to that. But the absence of a sort of a coherent narrative on the administration part has allowed a story of success, and as Rebeccah and John said, there's a considerable degree of military success, to be subsumed in the larger political narrative of failure. And the Iranians have established a benchmark for success, which is extremely low, survival. And if they do that, the problem with this narrative taking hold in public imagination, and as far as I have seen, public opinion polls in the United States against this war, then the possibility of a next conflict with Iran is going to be a lot more difficult. And there will be another one, because essentially we're in a position is we believe that we should degrade Iranian conventional capabilities in order to prevent a nuclear program lurking behind those rehabilitated conventional forces.
I think and I want to let Rebeccah respond, but
Sure.
I think one of the problems here, when we think back to the Cold War, Reagan did not negotiate with Shevardnadze. George Shultz negotiated with Shevardnadze.
Yeah.
Reagan negotiated with Gorbachev.
Right.
And because the Iranians have always refused direct negotiations of principles, I think that has made this a more arcane national security challenge than others in past times. And I think the president has been consistent about his desire to achieve a negotiated solution, albeit one that was maximalist by our standards.
Yes.
Still, it was always on the table. And you're right, that perhaps that's gotten buried in the course of trying to deal with this eternally knotty problem. But Rebeccah, did you have something you wanted to perhaps say?
Well, I think that what Ray lays out is it's certainly possible, and I think one of the things that's unique about this conflict is between the media and then the real-time updates that we're getting on social media. We really are living through this time of information warfare. I mean, it's not like you can just wake up and sort of just see what the news is all reporting. It's conflicting things, and then you have these ghost accounts supposedly operated by the supreme leader whom we haven't even seen yet, saying things, and so it is very, very difficult to know what is true, which is why I keep going to what General Kane and Admiral Cooper continue to say. And to me, and then also the developments of the United States working with these Gulf Arab partners and the Israelis working with these goals. I mean, it's remarkable that we are now to a position where the Israelis are sharing intelligence with these Muslim countries, these Arab states, and providing significant protection of them.
Yes.
And which to me, this is sort of like a manifestation in concrete form of the Abraham Accords in a real security benefit. And so I think, I guess I just see it a little more optimistically, just in an objective sense at looking what is being achieved. And it becomes a math problem if you look at, okay, even if you have a rump remnant regime in place, they don't have the ability to produce missiles. We are destroying their production capacity, the drone capacity, destroying their launchers. And so it will be a severely weakened regime.
Yeah.
But by the time this is over, and the United States and I think our regional interests will be in a much safer place. I think the wild card that we just don't have a direct control over yet, we just can't know yet, is just how long it's going to take before the United States and this coalition can have control over the strait. And I do think that that's very, very important to achieve.
Yeah.
I agree with everything Rebeccah said. By every quantitative measure, by every statistical index, the United States is winning the war. The question that I have, and it's just a question, is why is not that translates into a different national narrative in this country?
It's a reasonable question. And when we speak of the fog of war, we will, by the way, have a panel that will look at the future and the legacies of this conflict with my colleague Zeneb and others coming up shortly. So I hope you stick around. But speaking of the fog of war as regards the conflict right now, we know that the Islamic Republic sort of set up shadow institutions to the former regime or to its Republican institutions half a century ago. So the IRGC, which is running the state de facto, today is the shadow institution to the Artesh or the armed forces. There has been a theory that we could peel the Artesh off of the IRGC and work with it. John, can you speak, to what you know the Artesh is doing in the current conflict? Is it mobilized by the IRGC toward these defensive ends, or is that hope realistic that the Artesh could be an entity that is peeled off at some point in time?
It's not realistic at this moment, but it is the only hope. When this war began, my entire analytical focus about the political change in Iran was not focusing on the streets of Iran, because we have some very missing bricks in the wall about how an opposition should look like. First of all, an opposition should have, of course, like social media coverage, but it shouldn't be the face of a monarch on social media and only that. How many people can Pahlavi mobilize right now in the streets of Iran? Who is the executive committee or something like that ruling that movement? How many battalions, brigades, regiments they have? Like, what is their breach into the IRGC and Artesh? How many generals are supporting them in the Iranian security apparatus? What amount of money are they controlling? Like, what are the arms that they are controlling? Which missile brigades are breached by those people? We do not know, and I think the numbers that I can give to every single question is zero. But we have many social media posts, and regimes like this, they do not change by social media posts. It is about it's about your control over state apparatus and security apparatus. This is why Artesh looms large as the one hope. I wouldn't say a very realistic hope right now, but it is the only hope. Why? Because we want to avoid a failed state when the music stops. We want to avoid a civil war in Iran. We want to avoid a chaos in Iran. So we need state institutions, but not revolutionary state institutions and not hostile state institutions like the Revolutionary Guards, like the clerical establishment. So Artesh, I think, is the natural state institution that existed before 1979, before the Khomeini Islamic Revolution, that takes an oath to protect people. And on the contrary, for instance, like the Revolutionary Guards They take an oath to protect the regime, if necessary, from the people, if necessary, from the armed forces. So Artesh is very important. There are three obstacles before us about an Artesh takeover. First, Artesh has been under very strict control of the Revolutionary Guards for decades. And secondly, as to strategic weapons, drones, missiles, and also nuclear program and the Strait of Hormuz, all the problems that we have been dealing right now, they fall under the Revolutionary Guards portfolio. So Artesh doesn't have a say in these disruptive military capabilities of the Islamic Republic. And third, in terms of calling the political shots within the Islamic Republic, it is the Revolutionary Guards and the clerical establishment right now. The problem is, I agree that the United States is winning the war. If you look at the issue through the prism of combat operations and the operational level of warfighting, in order to win the war decisively, you have to be able to win the peace also, being able to politically shape the post-war status quo. What do we want in Iran and from Iran when the music stops in the Middle East? So the outlook that I see right now is an Islamic Republic 2.0, that the Khomeini revolution came to an end the moment the top cleric of the regime inherited the post of supreme leader is the very end of 1979, because 1979 was an anti-monarchist revolution. It was an Islamic revolution. It had a Marxist DNA, but we have to keep in mind that it overthrew a monarchy in Iran. So that's what we have. The second thing is IRGC over a decade has risen up to the power positions that it is controlling the strategic agenda of the Islamic Republic. And when it comes to rebuilding the arsenal, I mean, missile warfare capabilities, yes, to a great extent, but drone warfare capabilities, Iran, the Iranian drone program is not limited to the confines of Iran. Iran has drone production plants in Tajikistan, in Russia. Iran has drone production agreements with Belarus under Lukashenko. And the entire, the entire Iranian defense technological and industrial base is integrated with that of North Korea, with that of the Russian Federation, with that of China. And all these capabilities are not coming back in a decade. I think like it is case by case. When it comes to short-range ballistic missiles, I would say yes. But when it comes to drones and drone proliferation, unfortunately not.
So what I'm hearing about the Artesh is, correct me if I'm wrong, that we need them for a future Iran that is a friend of the U.S. because they have coercive power still, even though they're constrained by the IRGC, and they have a reputational benefit that they could build from to preserve the peace in a future Iran.
They have an organization, they have arms, and their ranks are manned by the sons of Iran.
I want to turn back to Israel because we've only mentioned it in passing, and really in three campaigns between 2024 and 2025, Prime Minister Netanyahu really led the way in exposing the weak fundamentals of the Iranian military strategy, and I think probably building the confidence in the White House that it could achieve, it could knock off one of the U.S.'s top three global threats. Of course, it's taking time, and the parties are working through the tactical challenges. But where do you see Israel right now in terms of its level of confidence in its achievements, in how it might be assessing the strategic trade-offs in the field? For example, if a cessation of hostilities was called within the next week or two, how are you thinking about Israel's strategic position?
Well, just to answer that last piece, if cessation of hostilities were to end now, I think that the one piece that the Israelis would not accept is the remnants of the nuclear program still being in country intact. That would be something that they would simply absolutely refuse. And I think the reason that we haven't gotten to that stage of the war yet is because the military, the U.S. on the U.S. side is still very comfortable in its pacing in the campaign to destroy the kinds of capabilities that the Iranians would need in order to inflict and impose a cost on the United States for actually sending in some kind of special operations team that would go in there. So I think that it's just a sequencing time issue on that, but it still has to be done. And I think that the Israelis just simply wouldn't accept that at this point. But the other thing I think is really important is that I think to raise sort of very, very good pressing question as to why the narrative is so slanted against this administration and why it just feels like everywhere you turn, it just seems like everybody on TV and everybody on social media is just talking about how this isn't going to work and it's going to ultimately end in failure, and the Iranians in some sense are winning, even though by sort of every other objective measurement they're just flailing. I mean, they're losing. I really believe it is during the Obama administration, one of the things that the Israelis continue to say is that the JCPOA, the Iran deal negotiated by Obama, was actually going to enrich a regime and make the entire situation in the Middle East far worse, and that no deal was better than that horrible deal. But the mantra, the sort of Ben Rhodes-led echo chamber at the time was, it's either the JCPOA or a war that we would lose. Those were the choices. That was sort of the fault. That was the choice that was pitched really hard on the JCPOA. And if you go back and you look at Senator Schumer's reasons for opposing the Iran deal in 2015, he laid out all of the reasons why he believed that false choice was resting on some wrong assumptions. And really it was resting on the assumption that the JCPOA would moderate the regime. And we know that didn't happen. We know that the Iranians were immediately working to deceive international inspectors, et cetera, and all kinds of flaws inherent in the JCPOA. So, but the Israelis at the time, and Bibi was really out there hammering on this point, saying the whole thing is resting on some false, completely wrong assumptions about the regime and the persistent problem it's going to pose to us by these sanctions relief that the JCPOA would give, and so. I think part of it, there's a lot of people wedded to this just myth that this war must lose. The United States and the Israelis must lose this war in order to prove this point that we should have stuck with the JCPOA. Yeah. And I think that myth is being busted very clearly. And my hope, of course, is that we do get a political outcome of the war that on terms that are very good for the United States and Israel. I think that's still to be determined. But I think still by every measure, Benjamin Netanyahu has been proven correct that the regime is not as formidable as we believed it was. And because the JCPOA also rested on this assumption that it was the best we could do because of the costs that the Iranians could impose on us if we were to use military force. And it just simply was not as effective or as militarily competent as those invested in the JCPOA would lead us to believe.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll get to audience questions. Is that okay? Yeah. I just wanted to ask about the GCC states, because they have absorbed the brunt of the UAV assaults, which are the hardest thing, I think, to defend against. They have yet to indicate individually or as a collective that they're going to go on the offensive. Do you see, John, any possibility of a shift in that decision, or as you wrote recently and astutely, are there desalination plants at risk, and that more than anything will keep them from striking?
Very briefly, any military action is the cross-factoring of capability and will. In terms of capabilities, we see that the Saudis have a very capable, very potent ballistic missile arsenal. Partially they have built with the Chinese. These Gulf Arab nations' air forces are more modern and capable than most of European NATO nations' air forces. They have invested a lot in these fancy toys that they have procured so far. We know that they have also standoff munitions that they can unleash on the Islamic Republic. So in terms of capabilities, we have everything in place. Will is the part that is, I wouldn't want to say stumbling, but has not been there as robust as it should be so far. The entire Gulf Arab operations are defensive combat operations, interceptions of drones and missiles. But the magazine depth between the interceptors and between the hostile threats is asymmetrical. And some nations are coming to the end of their magazine depth, so they will have to shift the offensive combat operations. When it comes to desalination plants, it is a real threat, and that should be also incorporated in the post-war status quo.
Yeah, thank you. Let's open up to questions. Let's start with Mike, please.
Thank you. Thanks for a very, very informative panel. Ray, I wonder if I could direct my question at you, and if you could help us understand the domestic context of Iranian decision-making. And let me just make it a two-part question. One is President Pezeshkian. He clearly is laying out an alternative future for Iran, one less confrontational with the neighboring states, less confrontational with the United States. But he's also been clearly sidelined, publicly sidelined by the IRGC. He seems to be basically irrelevant to the decision making about the war. But does that make any difference? Does the current of opinion that he represents, clearly there's a current of elite opinion that says that there's an alternative path for the Islamic Republic to go. Does that make any difference in the long term in the decision making of the IRGC? We have examples in the Middle East like the Assad regime, of a regime that does not care about public opinion. Hamas does not care about public opinion in Gaza. I always had the sense that Iran, there was more of a social compact between regime and more of a compact between regime and society. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I would say the social compact has been, whatever existed, has been attenuated greatly in the past decade with the uprisings of 2017, 19, 22, and most recently. So this is a regime that now rules by force and fear. And Dr. Pezeshkian has really not offered a path out of Iran's daunting domestic problems, economic degradation, class cleavages, ecological problems that are leading to water shortage, all kinds of problems that Iran has that are unmanageable. And in times of war, like when the regime is stressed, I think you begin to see the voices of security organs being the most prominent. And also, the theory of the case of I think at least the Israeli government, as I understand it, is that by profoundly degrading the security organs and their leaderships, you can make a potential uprising successful. That's the theory of the case. And it's been largely dismissed in this city. I think there's something to it. I do think there's one certainty in Iranian politics and in Iranian society. There will be another social protest movement. And I think what the Israelis have done is put that protest movement in the greatest chance of success than all its previous predecessors. I'm not suggesting to you that it will succeed, but it has the best chance of success. So in that sense, the bonds between state and society have been very systematically severed, particularly after the latest massacres in January and in the December-January period, where thousands of the Iranians were killed in a very brief, compressed period of time. Whatever numbers you accept, and some of the human rights organizations are suggesting 7,000 fatalities, even if you take that number, or the regime's own number, which suggests 3,100 people, that means more people died in about a 2-week period than they did during the entire Iranian revolution, which unfolded over 15 months. You don't come back from that in terms of trying to regenerate some degree of popular legitimacy for the regime. So this regime at this point doesn't even pretend to pretend. Once you appoint Mojtaba Khamenei as the successor to his father, used to be that the supreme leader's position originally would have to have theological erudition. They did away with that in 1989 constitutional reforms to elevate Ali Khamenei. Then the idea was he would have political experience and revolutionary commitment. Well, Mojtaba seems to be nobody knows about him, which is profoundly unusual in a society where it's very verbose. They write memoirs, they give speeches, they do this. So the fact that he's such a blank slate reflects the fact that the regime doesn't seem to be inclined to explain itself to its constituents. So they're not really thinking that they're going to regenerate some sort of a popular legitimacy or electoral process that will strengthen the regime's Republican pillar. They have decided they're going to live by fear and impose that. And if the fear barrier is broken, and I think one of the things about this war, if it's understood that Iran has lost the war, usually revolutionary regimes that lose wars tend to be demystified. This is why the Iranian narrative that we're winning the war simply because of the interdictions in the Gulf, and that narrative being picked up in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere, is, in my opinion, so insidious.
Well, we have plenty of time for questions, and so that's a good thing. Please, we have a question over here.
First of all, thanks to all of you for a really enlightening discussion. I'd like to follow up on Takeyh's point about the theory of the case being that victory would be a new set of leaders in Iran. I mean, it's certainly consistent with everything that's been said on this panel and on the previous panel. Almost every problem that you've highlighted about the post-war period can really confidently be solved only if you have new people running Iran. Otherwise, you're dealing with pretty weak reeds, like arms control agreements, and which don't have a great history of enforcement. If this point were to be persuasive with President Trump, and if he actually has, or he came to, or could in the future come to the conclusion that he really needs to do everything he can to get new leaders in Iran, what would you advise him to do? What are the 3 or 4 main things that the United States should be doing? I mean, Israel clearly has its program of eliminating current leaders, which is clearly a step in that direction. But the United States doesn't seem to be doing anything systematically. It's not holding conferences with possible alternative leaders. It doesn't. There's no indication that it's organizing, funding the shipment of communications gear, weapons, or others to people within Iran. But if you were advising the Trump administration that this is the key to solving their problems, what are the things that you would advise them to be doing?
Rebeccah, please.
Sure, I'll just quickly, so
Sure,
we can
go
kind of move
ahead.
done. I mean, I'm not sure that they're not doing these things, first of all. So, and I actually think that there's probably a good chance that they are doing them from just the little breadcrumbs that I'm picking up in the press conferences and reporting. And that's that in President Trump's initial recorded speech that he gave at the initiation of Epic Fury, one of the things that he said was, defect. If you are a leader in Iran, we welcome you. We will give you full immunity, defect. Now, Jean made the good point that we don't know what the mechanism is for them to do that. But I'm not sure there isn't one. I think that just by the fact that he is saying that there probably is some kind of mechanism for that to happen. I do think that Mossad is probably, it's not probably, I guarantee you is all over that country anyway. So it's sort of that is a known unknown that I think is probably happening. And so there's that piece. I haven't heard so much of that lately, this public encouragement of defections, but that doesn't mean that it still isn't happening. The other piece I thought was really remarkable is Admiral Cooper actually gave an interview on Iranian TV yesterday, I think it was, where he spoke directly to the Iranian people. And because there is this sort of narrative in DC and beyond saying, oh, look, we thought there was going to be an uprising and there is no uprising. Admiral Cooper very clearly said, stay in your homes. We're still not ready for you to come out. So there is a US communication strategy internally inside Iran, where we are saying, hey, we're still with you, we still have a plan, we're still on this phase of the plan, and we're not there yet. So I would be, so that to me tells me that there is this other thing that's going to happen where we will then be ready for them to move forward. And I said that there was probably a third one, and I think I said three, or maybe in my head I said three and I nixed it, and there's just two. But those two things I would certainly be doing, and I'm just not sure they already are. The only other observation I would say is President Trump seems to have it clear actually in his mind that he's very intentionally not giving a lot of this information. So although a lot of the criticism is that we don't know what they're doing, they have not been clear, Trump was very critical of the Biden administration for how transparent they were on what we were providing the Ukrainians. And one of his criticisms was like, why are we doing real time communicating our tactics, our strategies, the kinds of munitions we're providing, stop. So he does seem to have it in his mind as a very intentional thing that there's a lot that's going on that he just does not want to share publicly.
Those are very good points, and I'll just add very little to it. Number one, I think the president would be advised to explicitly reject the Venezuela model in this case, which at times he toys with, including recently. Number two, for the regime to suffer domestically, it has to be seen as losing the war. That means this war cannot end with the Iranian regime still capable and to some extent molesting maritime traffic through the Gulf. That would require the president to actually tell the American people that for the protracted period of time, there will be a concentration of American naval assets in the Gulf, ensuring the passage through that. Those two things, I think, would go some way, in addition to all the things that Rebeccah said. But somebody in this administration should reject the fact that we're looking for Rodriguez.
We had a question in the back.
I was with the Shah of Iran on his deathbed with his wife, and he had tears streaming down his face, and he said, I wish even the communists were taking over because at least they'd be progressive, and the mullahs will put us back 1,000 years. And I just have a simple question. When we talk to, I'm a Syrian, so we have a lot of people, we have a member of parliament, but those that are speaking from Iran just have one simple thing. They want the regime gone, and they would like Reza, the son of the Shah, to come back. So first is, why do you think the people are not, coming out? And the second, is there a role for the Shah's son to play, at least for a unifying factor, because the people just don't want anything to do with the current regime?
Whoever wants to go.
Sure, if you wanted to.
Right.
I do believe, and this thing, I'm uncertain about most things in life, but I am certain about one. There will be another protest movement of some strength in Iran. That's the cycle of the Islamic Republic, and that cycle is likely to be disrupted. When a leader is eliminated after 37 years, everybody's kind of discombobulated. When the Shah was gone, ironically, after 37 years, there was a discombobulation taking place. And in the midst of war, and as Rebeccah said, Admiral Cooper is trying to suggest we will not come out, there will be another protest movement. Mm-hmm. And I can say the second thing, this protest movement will face a regime that may be more vicious but less capable. I don't know the outcome of that conflict today, of that contest for power today, but I think everything should be done in order to make sure that the Iranian people will have the greatest chance possible to topple the regime. All the things that Rebeccah said, all the things that have been said in this conference throughout. The president is right, and the Prime Minister of Israel is particularly right when he says, we are giving you a chance. So a quick conclusion of this war through some sort of agreement brokered by Pakistanis, a premature ending of it, I think, will be damaging to the most important objective of the United States, which is to be the toppling of the Islamic Republic. The president is right, once in a lifetime chance. The Prime Minister is right, once in a lifetime chance. But this is a moment in time, that we have. It will not be a timeless moment. So this is a very critical time in that sense. I don't think you've seen that, hearing that in national media that believes that the Iranian regime is too resilient to be displaced. It's a strong regime, but it is not one that is capable of being displaced under these extraordinary circumstances.
John.
Oh, sorry, did you want to?
Nope.
Oh.
It's great.
Your comment about this once-in-a-lifetime
Yeah.
extraordinary circumstance made me think about the conversation between Xi Jinping and Putin about the moment in time, and this is our time, and we're going to change the circumstances. Which leads me to ask you, under these circumstances, what do you think Russia and China could do to sustain or change the dynamic of the Iranian regime? What do you think they will do?
I can yield to my
Sean, do you wanna-
colleagues.
I'm happy to add to Sean.
I can
but-
do.
John, yeah. John first, and then Rebecca.
Yeah, as to Russia and China, well, we got three important developments. One is we have a decline in Iranian missile salvos and drone salvos, but we have an increase in precision. When the war began, it was 5% to 10%, 90% they were being intercepted or going off targets. Right now, the Iranians are launching less, but hitting more and more efficiently. And this is because of the targeting data coming from Russia. And also, we suspect that there is targeting data coming from Iran. And we have grounds to believe that because we knew Chinese satellite companies were the primary intelligence and target acquisition source of the Houthi campaign in the Red Sea. There were two specific Chinese satellite companies that have organic ties with the Chinese Communist Party. Second, the very reason that we are seeing an increased Iranian missile capacity following the 12-day war is China, especially in the segment of solid propellant ballistic missiles, because it was the Chinese shipments of critical components in solid fuel missile technology, in solid fuel missile proliferation that enabled Iran to pick up where it left off with the 12-day war. And also, it is very important for the Iranian regime, especially in the realm of drone warfare, all these microprocessors and microchips coming from China and the hardware coming from Russia and the combat data coming from Russia to sustain these operations. So militarily, it is very important. Like politically, I think that's also a source of support for them, very important source of support for them. But we should also look at the post-war scenarios. If this regime remains wounded but not annihilated, it would be the Russians, the Chinese, and the North Koreans who will be there to break up the pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 3 more minutes. Rebecca, did you want to add to that?
Just briefly, I would say this is the piece where I would say that I have not yet seen the Trump administration totally embrace this reasoning, but they need to in order to solidify the gains that could be sort of at hand potentially geopolitically. Is Ukraine is now helping the side of the West. It's helping Gulf states with drone defense. I mean, Ukraine knows how to shoot down the exact drones that the
with cheaper systems.
With cheaper systems and the processes that are coming at these Gulf states, because those are the Iranian drones that the Russians have been using against them. And so this is it's such a layup to, I think, change the U.S. approach to Ukraine and to understand that we got to fully embrace the Ukrainians as part of this effort and dislodge the Iranians from the Russian orbit in this way geopolitically. And that is going to give the President Trump, I think, so much more leverage and a geopolitical position of strength as he goes into these negotiations with the Russia-Ukraine war, and then also in dealing with Xi Jinping, since Xi Jinping has been backing the Iran war.
I'll just say one thing. Why is China continuing to receive oil from the Persian Gulf?
Wonderfully put, Rebecca, and thank you, Ray. We have one more question, Dr. Fradkin. Apologies for
okay.
delaying you.
My question is for Dr. Takeyh. Ray, you spoke of if the regime survives, it will survive because it's not defeated, and perceived as a victory, and it will be more militant. wondered if you'd say a few more words about what that militancy would involve, whether it has an ideological component, especially if I observed correctly, the death of Khamenei was likened to the death of Imam Hussein in some publications. Whether that, whether there's some attempt to reformulate how the regime presents itself.
I honestly have a sort of I'll try to be brief about this. As a revisionist account on Ali Khamenei, I do believe that in the last year or so, Ali Khamenei had largely been sidelined. Not just because of his health and so forth, but because of the catastrophic misjudgments that he made during the post-October 7th period. There were a lot of, when Prime Minister Netanyahu said the rules of the game have changed, many members of the Revolutionary Guards and hardline elements that exist outside it actually publicly asserted that if the rules of the game have changed, we should change the rules of the game and actually cross the nuclear threshold and assemble a bomb. For whatever set of reasons that I can't explain, Ali Khamenei proved reticent. And once the June war came, he was one of his casualties in terms of his politics, and in February in terms of his life. So to a large extent, I think for the past 7-8 months, this regime has been making decisions without necessary leadership and guidance from Ali Khamenei. And he was commemorated in public, respected in their discourse, but they were making decisions. And you can see all over the place where he was saying something and the regime was doing something very different. So there's already a subset of people who were making decisions, and they were coming from the much more of a militant background, believing that the old man at the end of his rope proved too cautious for the time that he found himself in. So they are essentially, to use the word that's being said so often in America, they want to meet the moment. And the value of nuclear weapons has never been higher for the Islamic Republic. The pathway of getting there has obviously been more endangered. And I'll just say one thing because I think we're running out of time. Next Iranian proliferation regime is going to do different than the last one. They're not going to rebuild Natanz. They're not going to even nestle facilities in mountains because American munitions have proven they can access them. And I'm even that preoccupied with the enriched uranium that's buried somewhere in the mountain. I think their approach to proliferation is going to be similar to the approach to drone war, scale. What they're doing with drone wars is sending lots of them. 95% of them don't get there, but 2% does. And that's enough to put some cautious on the international community. So what they will try to do, in my opinion, is have a lot of little workshops with high centrifuges that they can muster together. These will be above board and transparent, but it will be an intelligence challenge, because if they have 300 of them and you catch 298, that doesn't essentially slow down the timetable. So I think the proliferation is not going to be vertical, deep inside mountains, but horizontal. In a lot of places, confronting the United States and Israel with the intelligence challenge. And the military aspect will be easy to hit these facilities, but the intelligence challenge is going to be more exacting because of the proliferation of them.
This has been a wonderfully informative panel. We're going to take a short break, but first, please join me in thanking our panelists.